No, what are digital clones?
So I help people communicate. That's what I've done my whole career. I've trained presidents of countries, prime ministers, Nobel Peace Prize winners, Miss Universes, members of parliament, how to communicate more effectively, whether it's speaking to live audiences or to the media, to CNN or the BBC, or to podcasts like this one. And I've always been fascinated by the use of technology. And when I got into this business, it was having a big clunky TV camera brought in and you rehearse with people, and that would help people communicate. Today, there's something really, really exciting. Of my 40-year career, this is far and away the most exciting technology breakthrough. It is the use of artificial intelligence to create digital clones to help people communicate. Because for the last 15 years or so, I've been doing online video-based courses, and they're very successful. I have 2 million students. But the problem with a video course is it's one way. It's one to many. It's what I want to say right now. It's my curriculum. It's going from point A to B to C to D. And really what people like the most is live coaching, live tutoring, where there's someone there listening to you, listening to your concerns, answering your questions. And people have always hired me for one-on-one training. The problem with that is I can only be one place at one time. It's very expensive for the people to do that. Either I have to fly to them or they fly to me. It's not scalable. Now, through the power of artificial intelligence, through generative AI, you can create a clone, not just text that has all your words, not just audio that has your voice, but video that looks just like you, sounds like you, more important, answers the way you do, and can actually coach. So people hear digital clone from me sometimes. They think, oh, yeah, right. I went on Expedia 10 years ago and they were chatting back and forth. No big deal. That's not what I'm talking about. Or they think, oh, yeah, I'm lost in voicemail hell in a bank and I hear a voice that kind of sounds human, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a video of you and any expert you might like, admire, or respect who's listening to you, responding to your questions, your concerns, your needs, talking to you, and can even, in my case, since I do communication skills, can do simulated interviews with you, can have you practice your speech and give you feedback in real time. So that's why I'm so excited about the power of digital clones, because it can scale one-on-one style coaching conversations with anyone in the world, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's not quite there yet, but it's close in pretty much any language in the world. Because I'm an ignorant American. I only speak English. My clone speaks multiple languages.
Oh yeah, that's super interesting, and I can see so many different markets that you would be able to go into as you expand the languages. I do want to ask you a pushback type of question of where would we go with the communication for face to face? Would we see regression in people when they're communicating? And then the other aspect is what happens with those people who really yearn for the face to face interaction?
I think it actually increases face-to-face interaction. I mean, just look in your field of podcasting. Many of the most successful podcasters who have millions of listeners are finding that people, when they travel around the country, around the world, they're able to fill theaters with people who want to touch them, shake their hands, see them in person, hear them. It actually increases the number of one-on-one and in-person conversations. And we've seen this with media throughout the history. Authors who write books who are really successful do book tours, and they may have 1,000 people come to their book signing to want to meet them, shake their hand, get an autograph. So all of these things build relationships. But I will tell you, a part of the appeal is at some point, I hope not in the next 50 years, you and I might not be here. But if our ideas continue to help people, our ideas could live on to help people in not just in the form of a book, which can happen now, but in the form of a digital video clone where people can talk to us. Steve Jobs talked about this about 30 years ago, saying it was his dream to be like Alexander the Great, meaning Alexander the Great had Aristotle as his personal tutor. He's like, I would love to be able to not just read Aristotle, but be able to ask questions of Aristotle, have Aristotle answer questions specific to me. Well, that's the promise of a digital video AI clone.
So I would tell you that I'm super interested. I'm super supportive. So if you do get pushback questions, just know that I am supportive. I'm part of your team. I want you to know that because part of my podcast is I actually interview AI avatars and see what they are saying, see what kind of bias they have. And, I recently had a guest on that talked through some of the ethical considerations of having alter personality or once you're actually gone. So let's talk through that and what ethical considerations are there now and where are we at with regulation and where will we be in the future when we have uploaded all of our data to a database and now we have an avatar that is essentially us.
So, a ton of ethical issues, obviously, with any new technology. Well, the first time someone invented scissors, it could have a good purpose of cutting paper, or you could jab somebody's eyes out. You can use any tool for good or bad. There's no doubt about it. And what's getting a lot of media attention these days is someone cloning, let's say, a well known politician or a celebrity against their will, without their consent, having it endorse ideas or products without their consent. Clearly unethical, absolutely no doubt. What I'm advocating is that with individuals like you and a lot of your audience, people who make a living with their brain, with intellectual property, they could be consultants, they could be speakers, trainers, startup founders, people who have to answer questions on a daily basis, quite often the same questions, and are training people, educating people, trying to inspire people with a message. If you have messages that other people find useful and interesting, this is a technology that is going to dramatically expand your reach. And with any new technology, there's always going to be ethical abuses. Certainly, there have been millions of scams put on by the internet, but do we really want to go back to 1985 when I was graduating from college and I had to type something in a typewriter and find an envelope and a stamp and mail a resume off? I don't think anyone really wants to go back to those days, even though there's obviously been a lot of people committing ethical abuses with the use of the internet.
I think that you are actually reaching a market that I was hoping we would get to. So I want to talk through how are you using this right now and how are you using it to improve someone's communication?
Okay. So I do two main areas. I help people build their communication skills. I also help people with personal development skills. I have 200 online video-based courses on platforms like Udemy and my own website with 2 million students. So I help people by giving them principles and insights they need, and then asking them to practice on video, where I give them feedback. And that's kind of a slow, laborious process with the online course world because they have to make the video, send it to me, post it to a Facebook page, that sort of thing. Now they can go right into my clone, rehearse. My clone is recording them, and my clone can give them feedback on, for example, what they're wearing, or if they're, continually scratching their nose too much. My clone can actually see that and give them feedback, and it can let them know, hey, your speech is kind of a boring data dump. You got to put in some stories. You got to give examples. You're too abstract. So that's how my clone helps. What I do now, because this is very new territory, I've only had my clone for 3 months. So what I do is I make available to all of my online students, my 2 million online students, around about lecture 3, I say, hey, by the way, there's now a digital clone to answer your questions in a text format, an audio format, or a video format. And I'm not charging them any extra for that since they've already paid for the course. But I also have available, someone can just go to tjwalker.ai, try it out for free for a while. They like it, then they can purchase a membership, which gives them a certain number of minutes per month for various tiers. So that's how I'm using it. But it's really deeper than that. So for example, every day I have my clone write a blog summarizing all the questions and answers that have gone through my clone on a daily basis. And I only have to do a quick edit, but it's not pulling stuff from the internet in general. It's not pulling nonsense from ChatGPT and other people's websites. It's only pulling from my ideas. I've built my clone based on my intellectual property. So I've uploaded, 6 of the books you see behind me that I've written, that goes into my brain. Thousands and thousands of online videos from my courses goes into my digital brain. Thousands of YouTube videos I've made since 2007 all go into the brain. My podcast interviews all go into it. So there's about 14 million words from my brain that have gone into the database of my clone. So when it gives an answer, it's not giving generic information that it pulled from a Dale Carnegie website. It's only pulling insights from me.
Very interesting. And so one of the things I wanted to talk through is, what is your plan for the future of this cloning business? Now, I see some markets in my mind, but I'd be interested to see where you're going with your organization and where you're going with this and where you're looking to expand into.
Well, the goal is to expand to anyone in the world who has access to some cell phone and access to the public library internet from their village. So we're really talking about almost 8 billion people minus the, several, 500 million or so who are focused on daily subsistence. So it's opening up to the whole world, and it's not perfect yet, but the clones now have the ability to speak in other languages. If we test later, the audio clone especially, you can say you want to talk to it. It says hello. Then you'll see a drop-down menu, and you'll see 50 or so languages. If you click that language and then call back and start speaking in that language, most of the time, not all the time, most of the time, my clone will start speaking to you in that language. So that to me is very exciting, because right now, everybody has to come to me on my terms. I'm the American. I speak English. I expect everybody to bend to me, which is sort of an arrogant position, but that's been my reality for as long as I've been doing this. Now I can meet people on their terms, speak to them in their language. Because if you live in Thailand and you're doing a speech or an interview in Thai, why do you want to have to convert everything through English the way I make you do and other American trainers and experts do? So that's a part of it. But ultimately, long term, I see the world where anyone in the world today who has a LinkedIn page is going to have a digital clone. Because think of it, a LinkedIn page is already a digital representation of you. It's often a picture. You may have different columns you've written, thought pieces. You have information about your background that someone has to read in a logical, linear way, the way you've put it out. If it's a clone, someone could just click and say, hey, Jonathan, tell me about your podcast setup. I see that you've got a Shure mic, which is a good one. I've got one of those, but what kind of headset? And they're not going to have to go through to your page, to your website, to your tech, to your frequently asked questions. They're not going to have to go through all of those things the way most people do now. One button, they can talk to you and get it. So ultimately, I believe it's a communications tool. Historically, for most of the history of Homo sapiens, writing didn't exist. It's a relatively recent invention. Books didn't exist because you had to handwrite them. Some priest would have to get a feather and quill and ink, and very expensive, very laborious. These days, any one of us could publish a book today on Amazon. The technology has spread. So certainly anyone in the world who ever publishes a book, and these days that's about 1 million people a year, I can't imagine 5 years from now publishing a book and not having a clone component. Anyone who has a podcast, what are you doing? You're trying to communicate ideas to masses of people. Well, the clone can do the same thing. Everything you've ever said on your on your podcast can be uploaded to your clone. And one of your regular listeners can hear you reference something and know that you talked about in the past, rather than sifting through hundreds of podcasts and forward, they could just your clone, tell them about it. It's so much easier for people to gain information. It really empowers creators, but also consumers of content and ideas to access things right away in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I first started out with some of your information and was researching your organization, and I saw some of the things you were doing, and I see different markets for it. And one of the tools that are out there right now, or it just came out in August, is the Microsoft ML notebook. And what they're able to do is they're able to integrate a lot of data, but you're learning from this data in their notebook, and it builds a podcast, because we found that a lot of people learn through podcasts. So I could see your tool leaning in and doing that, and it's very effective in that. But what would you argue to some of the people who are going against the doomsday of saying AI is coming for your job? This is just another feature that is proof that it's happening, and Terminator is coming for us.
So long term, who knows? It is possible. I mean, I'm a fan of Ray Kurzweil, and he says, at some point there will be a general super artificial intelligence that's so good that there really won't need to be any humans doing jobs. I think that's certainly plausible. Is that 100 years from now, 50 years from now, 20? I don't know. I think in the relative short term, and I'm not a prophet, I can't see the future, but I certainly think in the next 20, 25 years, what we're going to see is your AI is not putting you out of a job. People who know how to use AI are going to put you out of your job. And that's been true for a long time. I mean, I started creating video-based online courses in 1998, way too soon. I lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, didn't make any money for about 15 years. But then it really, really took off and is paid handsomely. And I've benefited because I use technology, video, the internet, high-speed broadband, and that's helped me. And certainly there's some trainers in the world who, because they didn't adapt and they only did things the old-fashioned way, face-to-face, have lost out. But that's true with any and every technology. If you say, I don't want to go into AI, it could lose jobs. Okay, that's a fine moral stand to have. But what that really means is you want to go back to 1960, where there were 400,000 telephone operators, mostly women, in the United States, and making a long distance phone call, meaning anyone more than about 5 miles away from you, cost $10 a minute. How many of us want to go back to those days where you can't ever, only time you got a call from someone out of your town is when a relative died? I don't think anyone really wants to go back to those days. And in fact, those 400,000 operators then found other jobs in other places. There was not all of a sudden some massive unemployment in 1960 when those jobs started migrating away, when the phone companies figured out they didn't have to have humans connecting every single call. So the history of technology has been every time a new technology comes in, certain jobs are lost, more jobs are created. I can't guarantee that will always happen, but I mean, I know people don't want to hear this. They'll think I'm crazy, but unemployment is basically lower than it's been in the United States in 50 years. So if all of this technology were so bad, I don't really think we would see that.
I think that you said it right when you said that AI may not take your job, but a person using AI is definitely going to take your job. So I started this podcast just so you understand. So I was going into a PhD program, and I finished my MBA. I finished a master's in cybersecurity, and I was looking for my next challenge, which was going to be a PhD program in AI. Came up with this thesis that AI automation would be able to replace about 50% of the workforce because of how cheap it is, and how close and kind of doing a lean sigma with AI. And what I ended up finding is that that may not be the case right now. And as I'm doing this research, we'll see where it goes. But what are your thoughts on integrating some automation in this and having it do operations for people?
Well, we're seeing that already. There are some people having clones answer their email and conduct meetings for them on Zoom. I mean, my focus has been automating the part where someone can call me on a Zoom call, get a private coaching session with me without me having to charge them $1,000 and them paying me $1,000, because that eliminates most of the work. And without me having to get up at 3 a.m. because that's when they want to talk about it. The beauty, and without me having to learn to speak fluent French. And that's what I'm automating, is my expertise, being able to share it with people in a meaningful way. Everyone's business is different. What we are finding with everything to do with artificial intelligence is, if you define the problem and you focus enough energy and computing power, there's often a way of doing it faster, more efficiently, so you can free up the time of the person who was doing that to work on higher level skills and higher level problems. So yeah, so far it's not creating massive unemployment. It's actually making the economy bigger. But I will tell you, I do not underestimate the opposition to this. I know someone who recently went on a major national business news program, and he's the founder of a company that creates digital clones. He received 3,400 comments to his appearance. 99.9% were negative. The only thing that wasn't negative was saying the host was good looking. This scares people. People were saying this is evil. This means your clone's going to rob a bank and you're going to have to go to prison. People were saying this is the sign of the end of times. The Bible warned us against this. This is criminal. The founder of this company should be put in jail. I mean, there is intense fear and negative feelings toward a digital clone that involves a physical representation of a face. And if we get a chance later, you can show it to your audience mind. They'll see it looks like me. It doesn't really look any different than a video. And the mouth moves and it's in sync. But I think you've got to step back in history and look at this from a certain perspective. Every single time technology has evolved to represent any part of a human being, it has absolutely freaked people out. The first people who ever heard music from a phonograph in the 1800s were screaming and shrieking, "Oh my God, the room is possessed with spirits," and they were running out of the room. The first people who ever saw a movie and it was a train coming jumped out of their seats. They thought the train was going to kill them. To this day, there are people in the world who think if you capture their image with a picture, you've destroyed their soul and harmed them. So every single time there's a new advance of technology capturing a voice, a picture, an image, some representation of a human being, it has scared some people, and the idea, that's crazy, that's bizarre. And yet, certainly 99% of your audience, you said, okay, no one's allowed to capture their voice on a podcast or a voicemail ever, or take a picture. Again, that's bizarre use of technology. They would think you're crazy. It's common sense. Of course you can take a picture of yourself and put it on your Facebook page. Well, that was considered satanic for a certain number of time, a certain amount of time when photography first came out.
What I hear you saying and what you're describing to me is essentially another tool that someone could use, right? And of course, I think going back to our primitive days, we're going to talk through people being scared of everything. When we first created fire, we were scared of fire, and you touched it, you got burned, but then it actually protected you at night. So there's this benefit to it. But the way I see it is it's another tool, like a computer. When you had computers coming out, I'm sure there was an industry that was afraid, and have another theory that I wanted to lean into, and I'm just going to mention it, and then we can go into the digital clone. Is that I actually think we're in an AI arms race, and I don't want to say AI, but I think we're always in a technology arms race with other countries, and so we have to leverage our competitive advantage as the United States, and every country is leveraging what they have as their competitive advantage. And one of ours is technology. And so we need to continue to innovate, or other countries will innovate and take that competitive advantage from us. And so I think it's actually pretty dire for the United States to continue to innovate.
Absolutely. In the United States and Silicon Valley, as much as in the U.S. political system, people like to blame California, they're a bunch of leftists. The greatest innovators in the history of the world have come from a pretty small geographic area in Northern California. They continue to innovate. And certainly there are geopolitical considerations to all of this. China is spending a fortune on artificial intelligence. And the capability of any one government to cause mischief, to distort elections, to convince the population of an enemy country that what's true is false and what's false is true is potentially more significant than traditional bombs and weapons. So I absolutely, and I'm not an expert on the geopolitical use of AI, but I certainly think it's a fair question. And I mean, this does play to the strength of the United States, as we traditionally have the best universities in the world, the best research. We attract the finest minds from around the world. And we've been leaders in AI, but it doesn't have to always be that way. We could be beaten if other countries really give it a higher priority and more funding.